Welcome, everyone. This is the September 2020 Power Apps Community Call, and we're happy you could join us here today. We have this Power Apps Community Call every single month. We do it on the third Wednesday of every month, and our next call will be on October 21st, 2020. In this call, we do the latest news and community contributions all around the Power Apps community around the world. We get to meet the product teams who actually develop Power Apps and invent them and support them and put all these cool features in it for us to play with. We have technical deep dives and folks from the community, like 3 folks we have on today, to share their expertise and cool things they're doing with Power Apps. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you another call as well. So a little bit about how this call comes together. That's myself on the left there. I'm Todd Baginski. I'm a partner and CTO at Canvas, a Microsoft MVP, and I love all things Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, and putting way too many animated Christmas lights on my house. I'm very happy. I'm recovering from a broken arm, and I really feel like myself this month compared to last month. As always, we also have Charles Sterling joining us here today. Hello, Chuck. How was your vacation?
Todd, it was amazing. And we kind of snuck away and kind of continued it on the sly, which isn't very subtle of me since I'm on a big public call. But yeah, we're actually sitting in the tropics of Florida Keys right now with my wife on the clock. So yeah, it was great.
Cool. That is very cool. You know, my uncle is actually with the police department down there. I believe he's a deputy sheriff.
I hope I don't meet him.
Don't get in any trouble. All right. So, yes, before I go on, I'd also like to mention, I didn't have a chance to get this slide updated, but it's not just me and Chuck who make this call come together. Dana Wicken is also a really big part of this, organizing it. She helps us every month to organize it and promote it and do many other things. Heather Hernandez is also helping us out with it all the time as well. And then Andrew Benson, he does the post-production on the video. So by the time you listen and watch this on YouTube, he's already done his magic on it and made it really awesome. So we'd just like to give a shout out to all them as well. Okay, so moving on to what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about the other folks who are part of our team on the call today as well, and then we're going to get right into the content. Today's theme is powering up. So we're going to power up Canvas app designs. We're going to power up Canvas app UI, and we're also going to power up Canvas virtual agents with the Graph API. So before we move on, I'd like to point out that you have a chat window available to you to ask questions. If you are stuck on Power Apps or have a question about it, or can it do this or that, this is the perfect place to ask. You've got all kinds of folks here in this call every month who are Power Apps MVPs, champions, Power Addicts, or just plain awesome at Power Apps. We really encourage you to reach out and ask questions. That's what the community is all about. And we give a big shout out to all the folks who continue to do that and help out every month. That tees us up for the first part of our presentation today. So Geetha, welcome to the call. And thank you for coming to share your time today. You're going to talk to us about how to power up your Canvas app designs, huh?
Hey, thanks, Todd, Chuck, and the rest of the team for giving me this opportunity to share my top tips and tricks to power up your app designs. I will go ahead and start my screen share.
So I'm curious, what is your background since you're showing off design stuff? Do you come from a designer background?
I do not come from a design background. I come from more like a pro code developer background. And so these are stuff that I learned along the way. And I think, and this is what I want to share, because you don't really have to be a UI or UX designer or a professional web designer to be able to amp up your app designs. So I'm hoping these tips will help everyone in their journey of app designing.
Awesome.
Right. Hey, everybody. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I am a collaboration and custom app dev consultant with Artis Consulting. And I'm also a co-founder of the Dallas Fort Worth Power Apps and Power Automate UG. I'm a business applications MVP, and I frequently blog and tweet my learnings and experiences using the tool set. And I am passionate about the Power Platform and an enthusiast of all things Office 365, the Azure Stack, and IoT. And today I want to, there are actually several tips and tricks that I use while I'm designing apps, but I've kind of squished them into my top 5 tips that I would like to share with everybody today, and it should be easy enough to remember with the acronym POWER. And under each tip, we're going to try and look at 1 or 2 tricks that would help power up your app designs. Now, number 1 tip is to start planning ahead. It is important that you have a sketch or a visualization of how you want your apps to look like, and that can happen right after you have a good understanding of foundational information architecture that you have, or even if once you have a good functional design and you know how the user flow and data flow needs to be. So it is important that you start prototyping before you get started with your actual app building exercise. And there are several tools out there. It could be something as simple as in PowerPoint, or it could be something that you use like a third-party tool like, say, Adobe XD or Lucidchart. There are several products out there that can help you. But PowerPoint is more than enough. That's something that I generally turn towards for my prototyping and sketching. And then another good tip for you, if you're like me and you don't know where to start and you're not a professional web designer, is to get inspired. Look at templates that the Power Apps Maker portal has. There are several app templates like the Customer Success Management app template, the Meetings app. Those have some really good UI UX designs that you can look at and you can adapt and extend based on your business processes. And then you also have professional developer-based sites like UI Movement and UX Matters, where you have professional designers who share their top designs with theming, branding, colors, typography, and so much more. And speaking of branding, I know Sancho's on the call today, and that is another great place to get started. He has a branding template, and there's version 2 out there that he put out in the Power Apps forums, where you can download the template, open up the app, how configure the controls how you want it to be, save them, and then it generates an MSAP file that you can use as a template to have a consistent look and feel for all the apps that are built in your organization. Below here, I have a bunch of Power Addicts listed. I know Alan Chai and Yusuf both have videos out there that talk about the top design principles that you should use. And if you look at their apps, you will realize the art of possible with Power Apps, and they have been my major inspirations in actually building apps that look very close to native mobile apps and web professional web apps. And then we have several other folks there. For example, April has her design framework around branding, theming, and performance that she shared during Ignite last year. And make sure that you follow them and visit their YouTube spaces, and you be sure to learn more from them. The next tip over here is specific to colors. So once you have your design and you have a user flow of how the navigation needs to work, first thing you really want is to decide on the theming of your apps. I usually tend to stick to 3 colors, but recommendations that you can go anywhere between 1 to 3 primary colors or secondary colors. Now, when we say primary colors, it means you pick one color and then have a light or dark accent, and that way you have a contrast variation. And you also want to make sure that your color variations are accessible, in the sense it's accessible for users that have color disabilities or auditory disabilities and things like that. And the way I usually have my style sheets, and I call them my PSS, the Power App style sheet, I tend to put my colors and accents in a variable on the app start, and that way I can reuse them across all of the controls and screens within the app, and I don't have to copy paste or start typing in the actual color codes. And one other way to do it is to actually store it in a data source if needed, and that enables consistency. And so all app makers in your organization can look at the data source, or you can have a template app with a screen that has standardized controls and styles, and that can be a starting point for building apps for your users. Before we move on to the next step, I want to quickly show you my
Geetha, while you're clicking over to that, I have a question about the colors here. If you're going to do a night mode, day mode Power App, do you also pick your colors at that point too?
Yes, I do. Yeah, so I do go to certain tools, and that's what I'm going to go show you. And I pick up my color palette and make sure that the contrasts and variations are present for the colors, and then also that make sure that they are visible under bright light and things like that. So here's my go-to tool. Material design is a go-to process or color tool for mobile apps, and you can see here that you can actually create a palette for you. It generates sampled palettes for you, but then you can pick what your primary color needs to be, or you can even generate a custom palette, and then it generates how the darker and lighter accents would look like for your primary color, and then how your lighter and dark accents would look like for secondary colors. And then you also have options to look at how your text needs to be and how it would look like on your primary colors and on your secondary colors. And the good thing about this is it also generates a preview of how this color combination is going to look like on your apps when when you have charts or you have controls and images dropped in. And then and another thing you want to note here is the accessibility. It does a great job of telling you what colored text will be visible on a primary background or a secondary background. So this tells me that using a black color text on this indigo background is not legible. So these go hand in hand with the WCAG compliance. And so this is somewhere that I usually go to get started, because it kind of comes with recommendations around how it has to be accessible, and also gives you a trending palette that you can use. Another site that I go to is Coolers. This is another one of my favorites. This kind of keeps it minimal. It gives you a palette with very minimal colors. Let's say we have a black and a white, and then these are just the three colors that are generated. What I really like about this is that you can view shades if you feel like you don't like some of them, and another good tip here is you can go export it. You can export it into a PDF, and it generates a PDF with all the color variations and the hex codes that you might want to use. And here, if you go to CSS and you actually scroll down to the bottom to the RGB section, what you can do is literally copy paste this into your app start and a set variable, and then just rename the colors depending on how you want to name it, or how usable it might be intuitive for a maker to use it across the app, and then you're good to get started. So that's one. Now, my second tip here is to see how you can use some of the controls. There are several controls available in the Power App Studio Maker portal that you can go above and beyond to create incredible looking apps. Now, one such control that I think is a little underrated and people don't really grasp the benefits of using the control is the HTML control. The HTML control is a very powerful control. You can use that to create CSS3 properties, and there are some supported properties, there are some that are not. You can create box shadows, you can have gradients, you can even create icons using HTML controls using Unicode characters. And then the only thing to note that it only allows you to have inline styles. You cannot have global styles in the sense you can't have a style tag and have styles in there that would be used by the rest of your app. The control pretty much just allows you to have styles that would control just that specific area or zone that you have the control for. And then it also does not support any animation attributes. And then a pseudo class is not supported as well. For example, pseudo classes are more like special state of elements. For example, if you mouse over, or there's a custom scroll bar that would, that you require to change the color on, those are things that you can do. But there's a lot more that you can do, and you can get creative with it, and you can really amp up your app designs. So let's look at that one. So I'm going to go ahead and show you an app. So this is an app that I have. This is a PTO app, and there are several nuggets within this app. And if you notice, this little piece over here is an SVG. SVGs are pretty light on your app, and you want to make sure that you use SVGs wherever possible, places where you want some complex animation or graphics. And you can also plug in your variables and make them dynamic. So in this case, I have some dynamic values popped in for me to see how many days I have approved versus how many days I have in total. And here we have a gallery control, and each template here has an HTML control. Now, that little box shadow effect that we have there, and that we're achieving using the HTML control. And here you can see that it's a simple div tag, and I'm specifying how the position needs to be, and I can also have conditional logic between what the color needs to be when it's selected versus when it's not selected. And then this is how the box shadow is really specified. You give it the dimensions of the offsets, and then you also specify how you want the shade for the box shadows to be on each side of the box. And then the rounded edges is how you specify the bar border radius, and that really drives how sharp or how rounded you want the edges to be. One other thing you notice here is that the background over here is also a simple HTML tag. And if you notice pretty close, there's a little rounded edges on the corner, and that's the border radius that actually drives that. The regular shapes that you can drop don't really, Power Apps doesn't have a way for you to have rounded edges, but HTML can enable you to do that. One other tip over here is the icon. If you have a lot of icons and if you want to make your apps more performant, one good way for you to steer away from actually having images loaded is to use Unicode character icons. So here you can see that this is a right arrow, and let's say I don't want to use the one that's available out of the box, then I can actually drop in an HTML Unicode character, and that usually starts with an ampersand hash and ends with a semicolon. And really this X2192 is the Unicode for the arrow. And you can also specify the font size and colors. And recently, Alan and Rory, they both had tips shared where they use Unicode characters on Power BI, and it was and they have links. And there's a Unicode table out there that you can go and search for a specific style of icon, and it will give you what the character is. So that's one tip that I wanted to share. And one other thing I wanted to show you is that there are actually different types of box shadows. Just a quick tip here. If there are cards and layouts that you want to display, then you don't want to get aggressive with the box shadows. You want to keep them pretty mild. But then if there are buttons and they're clickable, then you can have a much darker box shadow. So it kind of gives you a 3D effect, and it implies that it can be clickable. You can also have gradients set up in your HTML control. So what we have here is a linear gradient going from left to the right, and it has a lighter shade and it gets darker towards the ref. And you can see that this is set by the background property within your HTML control. And now if you don't know HTML and if you're completely new, there are sites out there, and one such site is a cssgenerator.org, and that generates the HTML for you. You can pick what the colors that you want, how the offsets need to be, how your box shadows need to look like, and it will generate the HTML that you can just copy paste and embed it as well. One other tip, a bonus tip that I wanted to show you is, if you ever needed to truncate text within, let's say you have a chunk of text within your gallery control and you want to truncate it, you can do that using HTML control as well. So what we're really doing here is making sure that the text overflow is set to ellipses. And so that's what you see, that it actually has a width set to 450 and it truncated it with an ellipsis. So that's another trick that you can use if you want to truncate text in zones where you want to just show a preview and then take them over to another screen or a form where you want to show them a more enlarged view of the context. So here is our third tip. This is the WCAG compliance that we already looked at, which is the Web Content Access Guidelines. Now we looked at how you want to, when you decide your colors and variations, you want to make sure that they're compliant. But then you also want to make sure that you add labels and tooltips to your forms and inputs, because they're, as designers, we have the responsibility to make sure that everybody has access to what we create, regardless of the ability, context, and situations. End of the day, we want to make sure it's a better experience for everybody. So make sure that if you, on the Power Apps app checker, there is an accessibility area that will display all the controls that don't have the accessible label. So that's something you want to make sure that you add them, because people who use screen readers are going to be hearing what those controls are for. So if you don't have an accessible label, or if it's named something that doesn't provide context, then it's not going to be useful for the users. So make sure you add them. And then here is another example where you do want to make sure that you add some visual cues and not just rely on colors to provide important information. For example, these are required fields for submission, and for a regular user, yes, these would appear red and I know that I'm missing these. But for a user who cannot perceive color as the rest of us do, it is going to look like it's just normal. So you want to make sure that you add some visual cues like an icon, and that that would tell the user that, oh, there's something wrong, it's a warning icon. And then there's also another theme designer by Office UI Fabric, and that also does a good accessibility check for you, on texts and color variations. And we'll look at that as part of my last demo. So this next tip over here is around effective and engaging UX, and I'm going to cover like two tips that would really enhance your apps. The number one tip is the text overlay, because it's become really popular these days, where you see overlay of text labels on background images. But the last thing you want is your users to be training to read such text. Now, the image on the left over here has text. It has these numbers and it has a date, but then I have an overlay over the actual background image, and you can see that the text really pops out pretty well. But then the one on the left over here, which has white text that has a description about the actual app or context and a button is visible, but it may not be as visible to every user. And so you want to make sure that you add an overlay to your app, and that's what we call a scrim. It can either be a scrim is a semi-transparent black or white overlay, or you can even have a colored overlay to neutralize the busy background behind. This is just another tip to make your user experience engaging. One other tip is designing fat finger friendly apps. If you haven't heard this term, it is a real syndrome. It's called the fat finger syndrome, and it is when a user inadvertently triggers a secondary action when navigating touchscreen UI, and then you either have a gallery, you have an edit icon and a delete icon, and the icons are either too close or there's not enough padding, and so there's not a separation between your controls or call to action. So here's the recommendation from Material Design UI, and their recommendation is that you have a minimum of 48 pixels with at least an 8-pixel space between your targets. And Matt recently also shared a tweet about how he uses the padding on an icon to cover the text around it, so that way there's a more hit zone and target zone when you are clicking on icons. One quick tip here is that you can use the one thumb, one eyeball test for mobile designs. It's just a way to find out if your mobile design allows for users to easily use the app in one hand with partially distracted attention. And it's a way to test if users can perform certain actions in just one hand and under 60 seconds. My last tip for the day is to reduce complexity. It is important that you remember performance is key and less is more. I like this quote from April from her Ignite session where she says, Marie Kondo, your apps keep the controls that really provide value to your app and then, clean the rest of them out. Use SVGs where there are complex animations involved, and replace your icons and images with HTML Unicodes if you can. Use HTML controls to combine a bunch of controls or data that you would want to display, and also galleries as another workaround if you want to keep your number of controls to be less than 500. And another tip is also when you have forms and you have scrolling forms, people can scroll, but then it makes it easier for them to engage with the app if you have them logically grouped or you have tab layouts or flyout menus. My last tip is also to use components. I know Emmanuel is going to help us understand how components are helpful and how we can use that to power up our apps, but they really help you with reusability across all apps and also in maintaining consistency with your look and feel. That is all the tips that I had today, and I hope you find them useful. And I hope these are tips that would help you enhance your journey with app designing.
Awesome. Thank you for so many good ones in there. I wish there was enough room on my phone keyboard that they could do that eyeball test to the keyboard.
Yep.
I saw Matthew saying that he liked that tip too there. Very nice job. Thanks for all the great tips. There's so many of them.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad I was able to share some of the tips that I use on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Todd, can I
You've
ask
been
you
building lots to have that many tips just about the UI to share.
It was Craig. I just want to see if I could ask Geetha a quick question.
Absolutely.
Hey, Geetha,
Sure.
on your control that you had the HTML text drop down that you're putting that in there, is
Yep.
that automatically turned on? Because it just might be because my company doesn't allow coding within. So because I don't see that as an option on our tenant. So I'm wondering if that was turned off by global.
So you mean like your HTML control where you have the div tag in there?
So is it actually a HTML control?
Yeah, it's a single HTML control. And if you want to stay back after the call, I can walk you through it.
You're using the HTML text control. All right.
Correct.
Got it.
Yes, that is right.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Okay. So next up, we have Emmanuel here to tell us about his cool Canvas App UI label auto width generator component. And for those of you who may have not built a Power App before, if this is your first time doing it, this right here, what he is about to show you, can save you a ton of time and effort. So Emmanuel, I'll let you take it away here, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Todd. Really nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for inviting me, and I really hope we're going to have a nice time together. I don't speak as fast as Geetha, so I hope I don't have that much to say. Otherwise, I'll go off my 15 minutes. Okay, anyway, I'll share my screen here.
This is a fun call today. We have people from all over the world presenting.
So the idea here is that I encountered a pain point during the development of my perhaps applications. It was that the native label control had an auto height property, so that the height of your label would resize depending on its content. But I wanted to have the same thing for the width. And natively in perhaps you don't have this. And so I thought, how can I solve this problem? But first, in which cases can we encounter this need? In fact, for instance, when you make an application where you have tabs which are right next one to the other, and of course maybe the label and the content of your tab varies during the app execution. If I change the label here, you see that if it's too long for the width of the label, then you have these ellipses showing up, and you don't see the label in its full length. You see what I mean? So this is one case. For instance, in tabs, you can encounter the same problem in menus. If you make a multilingual application where often, according to the language, length of a translation varies a lot between French, English, German, etc. This can be really tricky, and usually what you do, you define width that is sufficient to hold any translation for the text you're trying to display, but it's not very handy because then you have white spaces between your tabs or your labels when the translations are short, etc. So it's not very nice to see. You can have the need of it also eventually on buttons if you want your button to resize depending of its label, etc. So I thought, how can I solve this problem? So what I did is I'm going to try to explain to you how I got to the solution. What I did is that I'm going to show you here on the screen. I just put a simple label here. I put some text in it, and I've set its auto height property. I activated its auto height property, which means that whenever I will add some text, the text will wrap down to the next line. And of course, since I have activated auto height, the height of the label will change. And just to show you this, I've put another label here where I display the height of this label. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I want you to be very careful and look at what happens. So I'm going to resize the label here, and once I get to the last letter here, you see the last letter goes down to the next line, and so the height changed from 32 to 52. Okay, so I thought this is very interesting because this means that if I know that I have 20 A characters here and I reduce the size, and when it changes height, then I know that this exact width is the correct width for 20 A characters in this font and for this size. So if I divide the width of my label here, which have 20 A characters by 20, I divide it by 20, then I know the size of one A character. I hope everybody is following what I'm trying to explain. Okay. And so the idea then was to determine and calculate for each character in the ASCII table what unitary size is for each character. So I wanted to build like a collection where I wouldn't have for the A character, when it's this font and this size, this is the exact size with 6 decimals, the exact size of one character. And then I would use this to calculate the width of the label, whatever is inside the label. Okay, so that's the main ID. But of course, I tried to find on the internet some resources giving me these values, giving me the sizes of each font, each font size, the size of a unitary character. But I didn't find it, so I decided to build it myself using Power Apps. And I'll show you how I did this. So I created an application here, which I called the Font Char Width Builder. So I'm going to zoom a little bit first to show you what happens. So I built this application in which I did exactly what I just explained. I have a label here where I put 20 times the same character. Okay. And I start with the first character. I start with the space character, the number 32 in the ASCII table. And then I go to the next character 33 in ASCII table, and then 34, 35, 36, etc. Every time I set this character to this label, and then I have a timer which will reduce the size of the label here. And once I detect that the height changes, I know that the exact size of the label for 20 characters, and then I divide it and calculate the width of one unitary character. Okay, so I'll show you how it works very quickly. My PC is pretty slow, and so it doesn't detect the height change. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you the capture of what happens when I do this. Easier. I'm sorry about that. Okay. I'm going to zoom here. So in fact, in the application, in this builder, char width builder, you select the font for which you want to calculate the size of each character. And then you click start, and then it will go through all characters in the ASCII table. For each of these characters, it will, through a timer, reduce the size of the label until it sees the height variation, and then divide this width by 20 to identify the width of one instant of the character. And then every time it changes of character, I will store every unitary size of each character. As you can see here on the right side of the screen, I will store in a collection every size of each character. So if I select, as you can see it on the screen, the Arial font and the Lato font for the normal widths, font weight, bold font weight, etc., I will build a huge collection containing for each font weight, and each character its exact size. And once I have calculated the sizes for the fonts and the size, I click on the generate button, which will create a Power Apps formula that defines this huge collection as a code you can implement inside your application. So this is what I use to build, in fact, this huge collection of all characters in the ASCII table for all fonts and all font weights combinations. Okay, and the next step was to provide the community an easy way of using this huge collection inside one's application. So I made a component here, which is called the AutoWidth label generator. Okay. When you will import it in your application, you will see exactly this. So you have to initialize the component so that loads up the whole huge collection. Okay. And once it has been initialized, you will see this screen. So here you will be able to select a font. Let's say I want Lato, and I want the normal font weight. That's it. You can select many font weights if you want. I'll just take normal, and then you will select a char set. Char set is it's a set of characters that you will, for which you would like to store in your application in a huge collection, the list of individual sizes for the characters. So I'll just take tiny, And then it will generate here, as you can see, a call to a set formula function, which will define a collection, a table, in fact, called char's width. Okay, and in that table, you will have for each character its unitary size. Okay, and how do you use this then? You just take this, you copy it, and then you go to your application. You go to the app onStart event here. You paste it here. Since we are inside the editor, I'll just run the onStart event directly from here. So now we have in memory a collection of all sizes for the characters from A to Z for the Lato font and normal font weight. Okay, and then I will go back to the component here, the auto width label generator. I will take this formula here, and this formula I will copy and paste it to my label for which I want to have auto width, and I'll put it on the width property here, right there. Okay, and I'll just remove the auto height. Paste. Okay, here. Let's put it back to the height to 40 here. And then for the width. And so what happens here is it's not working. Why? Because the collection I just added to my onStart event for the app stored all sizes for the Lato, normal, font, and font weight. And here I am in OpenSang, so it's not working. Okay, so I have to make sure that I select the correct font. So I'll take Lato here, normal, and here we go. Okay, and so now if I decide to change the content of my label here, you will see that the width will automatically adjust depending of its content. Okay, and the interesting thing is that it takes into account the fact that you might want to put some left and right padding to your label. So if I add some padding here and I put 25 pixels for left padding, as you can see, the formula that calculates the new widths takes into account these the left and right padding. Okay, so using this trick and using this component here, you will be able to adjust the widths of any label in your application in whatever font and font weight you want. Of course, the formula that calculates the widths also takes into account the font size. So here I have a font size of 13. So if I put 18, now the font just resizes according to the font size. Okay, so this is really interesting because now you can build screens where your labels and your tab labels, so I didn't implement it here, but I could, in fact, I can just take the same formula I put on my label here for the width. Copy and paste it here on my label here. First, I have to set the correct font again, Lato, all right? And I'll just put the X coordinate of this label next to the previous one, which is label 1. And there you go. So now, thanks to that formula, if I change the text of my tab label, it will just adapt itself, and the tab next to this one will follow its size, you see? And so that's how you will be able also to implement the same thing on buttons. So on buttons, it will work just the same. My time is up.
This is great. Lots of cool feedback in there. Originally, when you said it was a component, I was thinking you're going to have to add it to the app as a component, but it's not really a component, is it? It's just a formula.
Yes.
That you built with an extremely impressive app to crank that OnStart code out in your formula. But that's great, so that you can use this in any Power App over and over. You don't need to get permission to deploy a component or anything.
Exactly. The only goal is to get this formula, which will initialize the like a collection of all sizes for the font and font weight you choose, and then copy paste this formula in your width property of your labels. And I just posted this weekend a new version of this component using the self operator in the formula, so that you don't have to change the label of your the name of your label. You see, so this so the formula works directly as soon as you paste it on the width property of your label. The only thing you have to understand, and this is very important, is that of course you see that the size of this collection here can be pretty huge. If you decide to generate this collection for many different fonts and many font weights, and you decide to take the full 255 characters in the char set, of course, as you can see now, it's my PC just hanged up. Well, it's going to generate a huge collection, and of course, performance would be a bit worse in your application. So the idea really is to select the font family and the font weight and the char set really to have the minimum you need for what you want to do. For instance, that's what I use now for creating breadcrumbs, because breadcrumbs, often you have a level 1, and then you have this chevron icon, and then you have level 2. So that depending of the label of the level 1 and level 2 in your breadcrumb, the chevron would follow from left to right according to the widths, etc. So just make sure you just select the correct char set. If you want to have some information about what's in a char set, I've made a little table here showing you that for the tiny char set, you will have the space character and then only characters from 0 to 9 and A to Z in uppercase and lowercase. For the minimum one, you will get also some other special characters, etc., etc. Okay.
That is incredible. I bet you spent a long time building this app. Your app looks great too, by the way.
Yeah, I decided to make a component because then you can just import it into whatever application. But I really recommend, and that's what I put on the forum, it's better if you put this component in a separate application, because the component itself holds the huge mega collection with all sizes for all fonts and font weights. So put it in a separate application, use it to generate the formulas, and just use the formulas in your application.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Gabriel from Romania. If there are multiple text inputs on the same page, did you saw some performance issues?
I don't think you will have any performance issues because you apply the formula to many labels on a screen. The performance problem will appear only if the collection you generate here is too big.
Okay. So if you select multiple fonts, but in Power Apps, on a Canvas app, you wouldn't do that.
Yes, generally, exactly. That's correct. Generally, in a Power App application, you use one font, maybe two, but usually one font, probably 1 or 2 font weights, and that should be enough for your application. So the collection will be not too big. The only problem of performance is if the collection is too big there, but using the formula in many screens will not slow down your application. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
That's great. All right, next up, we have Tomasz.
All right, let me just share my screen. I'll do this.
Thanks for joining us today. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now, right? And
so
switch from the UI side with Power Apps over a little Power Virtual Agent action.
That's correct. So what I wanted to do now, I just need to find out which monitor should I present the slide now on. This one, right. So just a few words about myself. I'm the business applications MVP and working with those Power Platform tools for over 3 years, so I quite got sunk into. And well, just long story short, if you want to know more about me or learn something about my work, what I'm doing, where I'm contributing, simply follow my alias on ak.ms/Poszytek, and there you will find all hyperlinks, all social media contacts that you need to stay in touch with me. So that's it about the slide. So we're gonna switch now into something different. So from Power Apps and all these cool stuff around Power Apps UIs, which I really loved, to something more near the automation, more near the processes that I love. I know that most of you who are on the call is aware that we have this Power Virtual Agents edition where we can build no-code chatbots that can interact with our internal employees, with our customers, so they can be public-facing. I know this costs quite a lot because like $1,000 per 100 sessions, or the other way around. Nevertheless, this is a cool tool because you can actually create great chatbots that can really help your business work more smooth and can just put a lot of workload from your customer services, your contact centers onto the chatbots so that customers can use them to ask questions. Now, what I want to show you is that when we want to use these chatbots internally, we can actually, or even not internally, but if we want to use the chatbot with an auth 2.0 provider, then we can actually get the user context. And when speaking about Microsoft, this provider is obviously Azure AD. So like in my case, when I start a conversation with the bot and I ask, can you show, me, my data, for example. And then because this triggers a topic where bot is actually requesting me to provide my bearer token, therefore it is asking me first to log in. So because now I'm in a very private session, therefore I will now go through the regular sign up process or authentication process. So now, so now what is going to happen right now is I will be directed to a web page where there is a token generated, this validation code. Now, once I copy it, the bot is actually able to, let's say, acknowledge that I actually got logged in. And so it was able to generate as well the bearer token, which I can later use, for example, to call Graph API in the context or on behalf of the user with which the bot is conversating. So now I'm going to show my tasks to check. Was an error, okay, but maybe there is going to be something about my data. Right, possibly general researcher has no tasks assigned, so there are no pending tasks. But for example, when I asked about my data, it was able to get the information that the user's name who is now conversating is general researcher, and I'm actually that user's manager. Now, how was it actually done? How you can achieve the same situation? Because that is really useful when you want to create a bot that is actually being used internally. And I bet that there are going even more awesome things to be announced during Ignite, but let's say keep fingers crossed on what announcements we're going to hear. Nevertheless, today, when you want to go and authenticate a user, you need to first go under the authentication setting in your Power Virtual Agents. And there you need to fill a lot of fields actually with information that is coming from Azure AD. Now, on this web page here that is present inside this configuration page, you have a very detailed walkthrough on what information is required in each of these fields in regards to Azure AD. So there are those examples just for the Azure AD. However, as said, you can actually use any other OAuth provider. It doesn't have to be actually Azure AD. So now once you do have all this information provided here and configured, then you're able to use this authentication. Now, once you want to put that authentication in your topic, let me just go directly to designing Canvas or authoring Canvas. Then within the conversation flow, you'll realize that there is a new action under call and action group of activities. So besides all these flows that you can choose from, there should be as well an action that is called authenticate. Oh yes, there is one. So it has to be like the last action in the set of in the flow of the conversation. So now once I put it in, it will automatically generate me the action to authenticate and the branching, what should happen once the user is logged in and what should happen if the login fails. One of the outcomes of the authentication is this auth token. So that's actually the bearer token that we can use to call Graph API in the context of the user. So now once I go to a flow, and that's the example of the flow that tries to gather users' data, then the first thing I'm doing is actually calling Graph API in the context of myself. So just calling the endpoint 1.0/me, and then in advanced, I'm using the raw authentication and simply providing this bearer and the token that is being passed from the Power Virtual agents once I call this flow. So let me show you how it works in the virtual agent. So now if I'd like to, let's say here, I'm just clicking too fast. If I'd like now to call an action and then find the one that says, wow, there are so many of them, like get user info, then because I have configured the flow to actually expect that there is one input variable or input value that is called token, and therefore I need to provide here a value, and this is going to be this variable that stores the bearer token. Now, what is also important in this authentication approach that we have in Power Virtual Agents is that, so this is also a global variable, and therefore, even if I go into a topic where I don't explicitly put this authenticate action, but I would like actually, all right, now there's some bad things happening into the conversation flow. Right? So if I would like to use this action here, this token here, because it is still available. It is, as you can see, a global variable that can be used by any bot. Therefore, if I start this conversation, let me save it so that I will be able to trigger this topic to test it.
Hey, Tomasz, for those folks who haven't configured the auth on this before, you showed the page where to do it. How long does it typically take you to walk through that?
This is like 10 minutes maximum because, all right, so it doesn't work yet to trigger this topic. It maybe needs some time to get. Let me just show you in a moment. So essentially in 10 minutes, you can go from having nothing to getting set up, and now you've got the token. Because basically, all the information that we need to pass in here is actually in our HID, and these that are, let's say, general, like those patterns or the templates for strings, that can be directly copied from the documentation. So the only thing that you actually need to provide is to go to Azure AD, which I have opened over here, and then create new application in your Azure, in your Azure AD actually. Then you need to grant this application, OpenID permission and user read all. This is on the application level, and grant this admin consent. And then once you grant those application permissions, you need to simply go into certificates to generate the new certificate that you need to copy over to the configuration page. Plus, you need to go to overview to copy the application client ID, so that one. And now, once all is done, then you're simply home. So this is actually the only thing that you are requested to do regarding this configuration. The rest is actually the information you can copy directly from the documentation. So that's really, really easy. And now once this is done, that should work. Okay, but it doesn't. But nevertheless, you have to trust me because those, okay, because the trigger phrases were not saved. Okay. So I can remember that this test topic doesn't have any authentication action added directly. It is just using this global variable. And therefore, even if I now start trigger, it will ask me to authenticate, right? Because this is how the global variables work. So they are just navigating the user to the place where that variable is going to be initialized. So in this case, this all works fine. So right now it is just going to call the Graph API via the Power Automate and should get me back the information about myself. And possibly it did, but I didn't add any action to actually write the output from the Power Automate. So it worked. The authentication went smoothly. There is no action needed because the variable is in place. So this is actually how you can use the authentication in Power Virtual Agents. Then the one last thing I wanted to show you is about the situation when you add your bot into Teams. So therefore, if you have a bot in Teams, then unfortunately it doesn't read users' context. That's again, I hope this is going to change after Ignite. Let's see what's they're coming up with. But if I said, then again, the first, no, that's the wrong topic. Let me just jump over. So I'll start with that previous question. Right, so in here also, even though I'm logged into Microsoft Teams, let it be Microsoft Teams desktop or the web browser version, then I still need to log in because this session that the bot is actually running is not authenticated. So the user here is just an unknown persona and the bot is not having access to my information within Teams. Although, as you saw, this authentication was faster. Now it worked. It was faster because I wasn't actually requested to copy paste this confirmation code. It was just once I hit to login, it took the credentials or my contacts from the browser, so from Microsoft Teams. So this is a little bit faster and easier for the user. And so that's it. Can you add a message?
I have a question. I've never tried this before. I'm curious. So if you're running in one of these and you pull back that property that gives you the bearer token, can you go like and invoke another flow and throw the bearer token at that flow and do that action on behalf of that user in the other flow?
Yes.
Okay.
So once you get the bearer token, and well, its expiration date is the time is I think 15 minutes or something. So as long as the bearer token isn't expired, you can actually use it across different calls to Graph API. Well, you know, you only need to be sure that user has an access to those specific maybe Graph API areas or data.
Absolutely. Thank you for showing us that. That's so helpful. And it's so easy too, right? Just go set it up and then boom, you've got your auth, your token, and you're off and running.
Right. Daniel, you asked if we can use this as another method of MFA. I doubt. So this is not for authentication of a user to systems. This is rather to, well, okay, sort of authentication, but you need to be authenticated in the first place to be able to use this secure calls to Graph API from PVA. So it's not meant to be the authentication endpoint or sort of. But you can, if you have your own auth 2.0 provider and it's working with the cloud applications, you can obviously use it as the authentication provider for Power Virtual agents as well. All right. Okay. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you for being here and showing that to us. So on the recent news and cool stuff front, Emmanuel also dropped another new component out in the gallery a few days ago. I saw this one on Twitter, and this is an IBAN checker component. So if you're working with IBANs, I suggest you check that one out as well. Then the big news yesterday, in my opinion, is the second bullet point. Solution import and export now works with connections and environment variables. I don't know if you work with the ALM aspect of Power Apps and Power Platform or not, but this is such a game changer and is going to make all our lives way easier. If you do learn about one new thing with the platform this week, I would go check that one out. Power Apps portals now have web API support. So if you're in a portal, you can call the APIs that support the portal to do CRUD operations. So that can extend a lot of user interface scenarios that you could customize within a portal, if you think about that. Then also Power Apps, obviously, will be at Microsoft Ignite. And so please go register for Ignite. There's going to be sessions and content on Power Apps there. And I bet you Chuck knows what they all are already. But go register for that, and that way you can take advantage of seeing all the great keynotes and demos and the other things that Ignite has to offer. Ignite is also going to have this thing called the Virtual Hub this year, which is tons of awesome pre-recorded content on all of these different topics you see here. So go get yourself registered, and then you'll be able to get access to all this great free training and learning material as well. We always like to take a moment to talk about our community. That's why we have this call to begin with. So the first one that I would like to talk about, Emmanuel brought this up. If you're running into something in Power Apps and it's not working the way you want it to, or you've got an idea for something better, let your voice be heard. Go tell Microsoft about it. You can see the link at the bottom of the page here. It's in the powerusers.microsoft.com website. And here is a screenshot of it and someone who submitted an idea. You can submit any idea you want and people vote them up and down. Microsoft triages these things. I don't know what the magic number is, but when enough votes get on something, they start working on it and it finds its way into the product. So definitely don't forget about your opportunity to improve the product and help yourself and your customers too. Thanks to everybody again who uses Power Apps CC hashtag to share the great things they're doing in the community. All these folks shared something awesome last week. And finally, there's yet another one last thing you can learn more about Power Apps with it. It's this Less Code, More Power series. And this is by Donna and Sarah. And they use the Channel 9 Studio to produce 15, 20-minute segments where you can learn really kind of snacky type Power App tips. So check out all the cool things and folks that they're interviewing there to learn more as well. Finally, we'd all like to say thanks. As usual, this is all about the community and everybody who came on today to share their time and expertise. Thanks for being part of this great community. I'm glad to be a part of it. I really enjoy this call every month. Our recording will be posted on the Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter at Microsoft 365 Dev as well to learn about all the things related to Power Apps and Office Dev. Our next call is in October on the 21st, and we hope to see you then. Thanks again for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.